I want to thank you so much for sparing your time to be a part of the learning that we continue to do together. I would like to acknowledge our moderator for the day, Professor Fred Wawire Mangeni, who's also our lead trainer for the Inter-University Child-Focused Research Training. I'd like to thank our discussant for the day, Helen Grace Namulwana, who brings a wealth of experience in the area of child development and child well-being, and Dr. Odama, who led the team that conducted the study for which findings we are going to be sharing today. It's an honor as AfriChild to be able to host this webinar and to continue to make a contribution to learning. So we are grateful for the opportunity that you have given us to join and be a part of this webinar today. I most especially welcome participants who have joined in from within Uganda, but also outside Uganda, who have an interest in our work and in learning and in the well-being of children particularly. I will say something very briefly about the AfriChild Centre. Thank you. The AfriChild Centre is a center of excellence for the study of the African child, and our principal focus is child-focused research or research around child well-being, with an intent to inform policy and practice. Our vision is for an Africa where the well-being of children is realized for sustainable development. We aim to do this by generating research that contributes to the evidence base to improve the lives and well-being of the African child. And we do this in partnership and collaboration with other stakeholders. The three areas of focus in our work are improved quality for child-focused research, and this is where we even have this webinar series fall under, because our intention is to generate research, but high quality research that we can share. We also look at the use of this research evidence, so increased use of research. And finally, the capacity to be able to undertake the two objectives or focus areas above, which is strengthening our internal capacity to be able to deliver. We are a regional center. Principally, we have been doing our work in Uganda, but most recently we have extended our work beyond the borders of Uganda to Southern Africa, but also to the Horn of Africa, where we're doing work in Ethiopia as well. Next slide, please. And how we do our work, our focus is research, so evidence generation. The other bit is capacity strengthening, and we have been doing this for different categories. We have the inter-university research program where we really work with scholars that have an interest in child-focused research to build their capacity to undertake this research. But we also have the program that we call the PURE program, which is the policy makers and practitioners program for research uptake, where we work with policymakers and practitioners to interest them and empower them to utilize research data. We are strong and focused on partnership and collaboration as a key approach for delivering our work. And ultimately, we do hope that the work contributes in policy advocacy to inform policy, but also to practice. So in terms of our research priorities as an organization, we have research work in the four main domains as outlined in the Convention on the Rights of Children, which are child survival and health, development and education, care and protection, and child participation. And so under survival and health, we are doing work around child and adults and mental health. In the domain of development and education, we are looking at early childhood development and also basic and secondary education. In care and protection, we are focused on violence against children. So we do have a lot of work in this area with regards to research, and the findings of today, I think, speak to this domain. And we also are very key on children's agency, working to ensure that we include the voices of children in the work that we do, in the research that comes out of the AfriChild Centre. We have cross-cutting issues that cut across the different pieces of work that we do. And so we are focusing on system strengthening, climate change, children with special needs or children with disabilities as it's commonly known. We're working with children in humanitarian and development settings, children in emergencies. We are deliberate on generating evidence to inform policy and programs, and we also support evaluation of interventions, and this we do in partnership with practitioner organizations. So this really is a quick introduction to the AfriChild Centre. Many of you might be familiar, but once again, I welcome you to this webinar, and I look forward to us having very fruitful discussions. I'd like to hand over to our moderator of the day, Professor Fred Wawire, to take us to the next session. Thank you all very much, and you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Timothy Opobo, Executive Director of AfriChild, for that really illuminating review of AfriChild and what the activities of AfriChild are. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to the fourth episode in the AfriChild Centre webinar series. As has been mentioned, my name is Fred Wawire Magedi. I am from Makerere University, and specifically, I'm an independent global health consultant, and I was lead trainer for the Inter-University Child-Focused Training Program. Today's seminar is going to feature the work. Sorry, I should have shown you my video. Can you see me? Okay, so today's seminar is going to focus on the work of faculty and fellows from our flagship Inter-University Child-Focused Research Training Program, who are based at the Uganda Matters University in Uganda. In addition, we shall have an expert in child rights advocacy, who I will introduce shortly. We have had a very good presentation from the Executive Director of AfriChild, and that makes my preamble very, very important. Clinton requested me to review the agenda, and in the interest of time, Clinton, I'm just going to ask you to flash the agenda so that we don't spend so much time. Flash the agenda, we'll review it very briefly, and then we go on to the introduction of the speakers. Clinton, please. So there we are. We have gone over the first item, which was the opening remarks by the Executive Director. We are setting up the webinar by going over the introduction of the speakers, bio, and house rules. We have had the AfriChild. No, we're going to have an AfriChild video. Can I request that we have the video probably somewhere towards the end? Clinton, is that okay? I'm worried that we may be running out of time before we get to the others. The video is only 5 minutes?
Yes, the video is 5 minutes.
Okay, all right, then we can have the video. And after that, we shall go into the presentation by Dr. Odama and reflections from the child rights space in Uganda by Miss Helen Grace Namurwana. And then we'll have a wrap-up question and answer session And finally, we shall request AfriChild to come back and close the webinar. So without much ado, I would like to introduce the speakers for today. And the speakers for today, as I have mentioned, are two, but in one is a group of staff from the Uganda Matters University. The team from Uganda Matters University is represented and led by Dr. Adama Kai Modest. He is a senior academic staff of Uganda Matters University, Faculty of Education. He holds a doctorate in education and Masters of Education degrees, both from Loyola University in Chicago, USA, with specialization in curriculum, instruction, and education psychology. He enjoys collaborative, partnership-based, interdisciplinary, and action research because these help us make informed decisions for the betterment of our environment and people. Modest will discuss the important topic of exploring child-based strategies in addressing child-to-child violence in primary schools in Kitgum district in northern Uganda. After the presentation from Uganda Matters University, we shall invite Ms. Helen Grace Namulwana. She's a child rights advocate who has worked in the space for over 23 years. She currently heads Amora Africa, an organization that works with youth and children in city suburbs. She will share her reflections from the child rights space. Then after that, we shall, or before we go on to the presentation, just a few house rules. First of all, I would request you to please register in the chat. We know you registered online, but sometimes the registration online is different from those who have actually attended. So it will be good for us to know who is attending the webinar, and especially mention your organization or institution and their country that you are from. In addition to that, we shall request that you all hold your questions for the question and answer session. You have an opportunity of sending comments in the QA compartment or the chat facility within Zoom, so you could do that. But otherwise, when we get to the Q&A session, we shall give some of you an opportunity to express your views or to ask questions. We shall try as much as possible to stick to the time. We'll give 5 minutes for the program video, 15 minutes for the presentation, 10 minutes for the reflections, and then we'll give a bit more time, 17 minutes for the wrap-up session before we close the meeting. So without much ado, I would like to invite AfriChild to run the inter-university program video. AfriChild, please go ahead.
AfriChild stands for three major issues. One is to generate evidence through research, but evidence that should inform policy and ultimately impact on the African child.
The child-focused research training was an answer to a call within the country because there was a dearth of researchers, child-focused researchers in the country. And AfriChild Centre, as a center of excellence in child-focused research, saw the idea of building local capacity to be able to undertake this research.
Child-focused research it's a research that is conducted with children, involving children. So they are recognized as participants and they are recognized as generating the evidence that is being required themselves.
child-focused research comes in a way that you try to listen to the child whom we have never listened to. You know, in Africa, children don't speak, we speak for them. And so that is difficult if you want to do something for them.
The inter-university child-focused research methods training has given us, the mentors, the trainers, as well as the participants, a very unique opportunity. Not that because we did not know how to conduct research, but first, the training program gave us an opportunity to focus on a very special part of our population, that is the children.
We have been conducting social research, but we are using the usual methods of research, and we are not specifically focusing on child research.
This was unique because the training was spread out over 2 years. It was a training where we had enough time, okay? Most of the trainings that we do, it's either 1 week, 2 weeks, or 1 month. But if you spread it out over 2 years, it gives you the opportunities to have an incremental strategy so that everything that you do during the first level training, you increase on it during the next level, and so on and so forth.
The inter-university trainees, now I can call them experts in child-focused research. Because when we first recruited them, there was a lot of skepticism. What is AfriChild going to offer? What is new? But when we went through with them, what does child-focused research mean? What does it mean to conduct research on children, with children, and by children? The whole concept of child-focusedness, was now well understood by our trainees.
Whereas these were all lecturers, and all of them had masters, and most of them had PhDs, we still found a level of heterogeneity. They were not exactly the same in their level of understanding of some of the concepts, especially when it came to research methods and also data analysis. So it was a challenge to try and find a level where we could get those who knew more, understand, and still maintain their interest, and those who didn't know a lot, be able to bring them up to the same level.
Very few of us are conversant with the research with the children. So we had to start all afresh and see how we can help children be involved in the research that we do. Because all along we have been thinking that it is only the top academics who do research and who must be involved in data collection and so forth, interpretation of data. Now we have found that the children are also a part of that.
We wanted to do something different in this training, research training program. We said on top of the classroom teaching and practicums, we wanted them to go to the real field experience. So we're able to award seed grants to all the 7 universities.
This project, up to this point, we can say has been a very successful one because we have had several research method training workshops, and all of them have been well attended with very active participation from colleagues. And having seen that this project has succeeded this far, my recommendation to AfriChild would be to scale up this project. So far, only 7 universities are participating, and Uganda has over 50 universities. So if there was resources or there would be opportunity for funding, I would recommend that more universities be brought onto the program so that as many colleagues as possible can get this unique opportunity to train in child-focused research methods.
Thank you very much, AfriChild, for this informative video. It really lays out the history of the inter-university training program and gives some views from the persons who designed it, who have facilitated it and who have participated in it. So without much ado, I want us to go back to our schedule, and in our agenda or schedule, the next item we shall be handling is exploring child-based strategies in addressing child-to-child violence in primary schools in Kitgum district, northern Uganda. This will be presented by Dr. Odama Kaye Modest on behalf of the team at Uganda Matters University. Modest, I hand over to you for the presentation.
Thank you so much, our moderator, Professor Fred. And I want also to thank AfriChild for hosting us today. Colleagues, you are welcome into this discussion. My name is Odama Kaye Modest, a team from Uganda Matters University, and I'm the one that is representing this team. Our research dissemination today will focus on children. Next slide, please. The topic of our study is exploring child-based strategies in addressing child-to-child violence in primary schools in Kitgum district, northern Uganda. Our focus is on the strategies children use in addressing child-to-child violence. Next, please. This is the order of my presentation. We begin with introduction, research questions, methods, results, discussion, conclusions, and recommendations. Next. Background to our study, we see that children have challenges, and this challenge is violence perpetrated by children against fellow children. And this violence has a global connotation. It is felt all over the world and in our schools. This has been reported already by so many scholars. Children suffer from physical torture, from psychological, social torture, and these affect their learning and their well-being. Next, please. We have seen several reports in Uganda's environment that children suffer from physical violence. And this has been reported by so many scholars. Like Wandera, 29% of the children experience physical violence, and 34% experienced emotional violence. Further, other scholars refer to children's violence and state that more than 90% of the children experience both physical and emotional violence. Kitgum district is no strange district. Compared to so many districts in Uganda, Kitgum ranks 60% in terms of violence against children. And we discovered a study gap in our endeavor. We found out that so many studies focus more on causes of violence and then consequences of the violence. But that is not enough. We wanted to know whether children do in fact participate and do they have their own contribution towards this. So this is why our study focused on child-to-child strategies. Next, please. And why do we focus on children's initiatives in conducting research and in helping resolve problems of child violence? We need empirical evidence because that has been lacking in the Uganda's environment and many countries in Africa. And then also we want to focus on this because there is a need to inform the adults about children's potential in addressing violence against their own self. Thank you. We move to the next. 3 research questions guided our discussion and our research. One of them was, what are the individual child-based strategies used by the children to solve their violence? 2, how do the children use informal peer group-based strategies? 3, we also wanted to know how the children use formal peer group-based strategies in addressing the violence in their schools. Next, please. What did we use as a method to study this issue, this phenomenon? We had an approach which we call qualitative approach. The reason why we used this qualitative approach was to be able to explore, interpret, and understand children's experiences on how they use these strategies to resolve their violence against themselves. Next, please. The design that we found very appealing and very understanding in terms of how we could do our study was the phenomenological research design. The reason being, we wanted to describe, we wanted to interpret children's lived experiences, especially related to child-to-child violence, especially those strategies we wanted. Next, please. The study population, we had a number of issues to consider here. One, the primary schools themselves we studied. There were 130 primary schools in Kitgum district. And then we surveyed the group that we targeted there, the children themselves. The total number of children in the primary schools from primary 5 level to primary 7, aged 10 to 17 years, was 873. And then we had 20 teachers who were responsible for teaching and managing these primary levels, P5 to P7. And then why did we select this group of children? The reason is that they are older compared to the other children in the lower primary school levels. And we assumed, informed by research, that these children can be capable to address their own challenges related to violence. Next, please. Study samples and sampling procedures. Our samples ranged from primary schools themselves, the children, and then the teachers. Those are the 3 categories. For the primary schools, we selected 4. And how did we select the 4? We used stratified and then completed it with a simple random procedure, because we had 2 groups of schools, those that are urban-based and those that are rural-based. And then for the 40 pupils, we selected them using convenience sampling procedure. The reason being, studies were going on, and then COVID was behind there, still affecting people. So we only got those that were available and they were ready to participate. And then for the teachers that we selected, we went for 20 in the number. And how did we do that? We did by purposive sampling procedure, because these are the teachers who manage the upper primary that we targeted. And they teach them, they manage them every day, and they are the ones who are responsible for these children. And then this gives us a total of 60 research participants for our study. Next, please. The instruments that we used in our study are 3. Focus group discussion guide. So here we had 4 conversational focus group discussions involving 10 children in each group. So all the 40 children were covered under the 4 groups, 10 each. Children's drawings was another interesting experience that we had, and used that as a tool to get children's views on child-to-child strategies that they use. And then interview guide was used for the teachers, because we wanted the teachers to give us in-depth information on what they also observe and experience with the children. Next, please. We had to go through the procedure that we call ethical clearance, because that is important in protection of children and our research participants and so forth. So we had Gulu University Research Ethics Committee, Uganda National Council of Science and Technology, local government administrative clearance from Kitgum district itself. And then we also used informed consent and assent forms to be signed by the research participants. Next, please. How did we analyze our data? We had 3 ways to do that. 1, data collected had to be typed and transcribed, reread, organized, and we coded it to enable us now, after coding, to import it into the Atlas TI version 8 for the analysis. And there we focused on the themes that were generated which were guided also by our research questions. Next, please. What did we find? Briefly, we found quite a number of things. One of them related to the biodata of the pupils and some of our key respondents. And here we had to generate this using the Atlas TI, and it gave us the key areas. One of them is the children we surveyed had average age of 14 years. Though we had focused between 10 and 17 years, the average age is 14 years. And then in terms of the gender, the children were both male and female. And then moving on about their experience of child-to-child violence, almost everybody declared that, yes, child-to-child violence is affecting them. And then when it came to their religion, we identified all the children we surveyed were Christians. So they ascribed to Christianity. Besides that, they belonged to different church denominations. Some were Protestant, others were Catholic. So this came out in our Atlas TI presentation here. Next, please. The child-to-child strategies that we use were categorized into 3 individual child-based strategies. This is the first one. And when we looked at this, the age factor was so important for the children. The older the child is, the more experience the child had in resolving violence among themselves. And then we also found out that the children organized themselves in such a way that they were able to identify some of the older children among them to report to their teachers whenever there was violence going on among children in the schools. Thirdly, the children used a lot their family background in how to cope with the situation. So in a family where the children come, sometimes parents fight. And when they resolve violence by violence, the children can also copy that. But by and large, most of the children used reconciliation that they learned from their family members. The parents resolve violence by reconciling, discussing issues. So the children also tend to replicate that in their daily experience in resolving violence in the schools. And one of them stated this to undercut this. Sometimes the pupil who is observing the violence runs and reports to a teacher. That speaks to our bullet number 2, children report to teachers. Next, please. And here is how the children do this individually. You see the child in the middle of this picture. This was a picture drawn by the children themselves. So the child in the middle is much older, more experienced, is resolving a conflict between the girl and the other child on the other side, who is a boy. So he talks to the boy first, and then later goes to talk to the young girl that violence is not the right way to go. We need to live civilly. And this they are capable of doing. Next, please. Here is again another boy who is resolving violence between between 2 girls. And the boy uses his muscle power because he's older and stronger, suppresses the 2 from fighting and stops the fighting very effectively. Next, please. This is a drawing which indicates that the family background is key in the way children resolve violence. Some of these children learn from the parents to use violence to stop violence when the parents fight at home a lot. But when the parents resolve violence by resorting to peaceful means and reconciliation, the children also learn that and replicate it in their day-to-day school life where there's violence, they stop it through reconciliation. Next, please. Children use also informal means of resolving violence. For example, children hailing from the same village and they are in the same school, they will use the advantage of coming from the same village, knowing each other very well from their village, and they use that to come up in their groups to defend themselves against other children who fight them. And sometimes they even select one of their bigger person who is older to come up and negotiate with the other fighting group so that the fighting stops. Next, the children also report to their parents in their own capacity. They have their groups, they have their children, they value and they represent them. So those will go and do report to the parents. The next one is forming cliques. The children are so clever in the sense that they also form their own cliques based on the playmates. They play together, they go to fetch water together, they discuss things together. Sometimes they do destructive things together in their cliques. But those cliques are beginning to be used by the children for resolving their violence among themselves. And the third approach the children use is using the formal peer group-based strategies. Formal in the sense that they use structures that are created among them. Sometimes even they have their own rules that they use in these formal setups. Sometimes they use the school setup. That is a structure of leadership, including the prefects, the student leaders. Sometimes they use the teachers themselves to manage their violence. For example, here, they use debating clubs. Debating clubs have significant rules that inform the children's behavior and how they conduct debate. They have motions that are set on violence. So when they're debating, even those children who were doing violence attend this debate and listen to the discussion. That is a mind changer and life-changing environment for them. They can change to become better children. Some of them use prayers. They pray for the children who are violent. They also pray for one another to stop the violence. And more so, some of them appeal to their leaders to know how to manage the violence. They go to the prefects group, the student leaders, or the teachers themselves to help them in that. So here is an example of how they use prayer to do that. Children kneeling in the church or outside or in their classroom to pray for violence to stop. Next figure is something related to debate. The children debate and draw their motions and argue, come up with some resolutions and decisions about violence and how to stop it in their schools. So colleagues, this is quite a wonderful discussion and finding that is out there. In our discussion, briefly, we can say that violence against children is not a good thing. It is painful, it hurts the children, it affects their life, particularly it affects their learning. And because of that, it is very imperative for those of us who can be allies with the children to come up and help empower the children to stop it. Children, we studied, use so many different practical ways to resolve their problems or violence very competently, as we had already seen earlier. And this is informed by research from so many other countries, like in the Philippines. We see a study that was done by Third et al. And then Heinrichs in Burundi. So more could be discussed here, but I leave that to the details that are now in the report. What do we conclude? Based on these findings, child-to-child violence is physically and emotionally painful. Secondly, it is immoral. It is injustice against children. It violates their rights, their right to education, their right to life, and because they get a lot of injuries, sometimes the injuries lead into death. So that's why it is immoral. And then it is also counterproductive to their learning, as I had indicated earlier. But more importantly, children can effectively address child-to-child violence. And because of that, why don't we use them as our allies instead of treating them as ignorant, as people who can't help us in managing violence against children? And then this leads me into the recommendations the team came up with. Please, next slide. Our recommendations are many, but I have selected only 3. 1, adults, especially parents, teachers, counselors, religious leaders, managers of different institutions should support children's initiatives to address child-to-child violence, because the children are really seen to be competent That is important because it will help them hone their own problem-solving skills and other skills. Adults also should respect children as important allies, not as people who are incompetent. Children have the capacity in their own way, unique ways. So we need to tap into that and help the children, empower them to become better in resolving child-to-child violence. Lastly, our teachers, our parents, and our head teachers managing the schools, please, we need exemplary life. We need to be role models to these children so that they can emulate our role modeling, being conflict-free, violence-free in the way we relate with one another and in the way we relate with our children. Together with the children, we can stand and manage violence against children and even make a better society. Next slide. Thank you so much, my dear audience, for coming and attending today. Thank you so much, AfriChild. Thank you so much, our moderator, for leading us through this session. Back to you, dear moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Odama Kaye Modest, for such a very well-researched study and articulately presented to the audience. As mentioned earlier, please note down your questions. We shall give you an opportunity to pose the questions. For now, I suggest, as indicated on the agenda, we go straight to the next discussant, and this is Ms. Helen Grace Namruana. She's going to give us her reflections from the child's rights space in Uganda. Over to you, Ms. Namruana. Please unmute and put on your video so that we can hear from you. And we give you 10 minutes. Wonderful. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Prof, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, AfriChild, for giving us the opportunity to be able to share and learn and reflect on things that affect our children. And thank you, Doctor, for that presentation. And I'll just go straight in. I was telling Clinton that I deliberately threw away my slides so that we make it, a conversation more real, away from the usual things that we do, present slides and then we move on. And so within my next 9.5 minutes, I'm just going to share a few things for personal reflection, but also for us as a sector concerning the space that we have, the child rights space that we have in this country. And I'll start it by sharing my own journey from childhood to, to where I am today, sort of linking it to what a doctor has just shared. As a child, I'm a first child of 6. And as a first child, my parents had me when my mom was 18, my dad was 21, so they were pretty young. So we have sort of grown up together. And as a first child, I can now look back and say that there was a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations, because then naturally you deputize the parents. And I recall incidents where my immediate follower, who was not very engaged, work, house chores and all these things were not her cup of tea. And so from time to time, she would refuse to do work, knowing I would be the one to be punished for the work that is not done at home. And honestly, for the longest time, I did get punished for any work that any of the 6 of us did not get to do, until one day we actually got into a serious physical fight at home. And in that fight, we got injured. We both got injured. And it was as a result of the consequence of that violence at home that I sought refuge in Daddy, who seemed to have my ear, who seemed to have an ear for me. And I said, Daddy, I'm tired of this. I'm injured today because so-and-so does not like to do housework. When I say these things to her, she says, well, I won't do it. You know who is going to get punished. And as you know, it's always me who gets punished. And so my dad carried that conversation to his wife. And then the conversation at their level started. And I remember, I think when it got to that stage, Mommy came back home unexpectedly and hid somewhere for 2 to 3 hours just to listen to what happens. And she had us fight. You were supposed to do dishes today, you did not do them. And my sisters, confidently said, yeah, I did not do them, but we both know who's going to get punished. And Mommy was taking notes. And after those many hours, she came out and beat the blue lights out of my sister and said, going forward, you're going to do this to compensate for the lost time. Why am I sharing these things? I am sharing this experience because violence, Doctor has talked about violence in the learning space. And I'm, sort of pushing back before we get to the learning space. Where is the child? Because the situation in the home, in a way, contributes to the way things turn out in the learning space. When I finally moved to boarding school, because I was in day school, my siblings were all in boarding school through primary. I'm the only one who was in day school through primary. When I finally moved to boarding school in secondary school, I struggled to fit in because I knew something was going to go down. There were people who looked like my mother in my female teachers. Then there were guys who I had been told things would happen and all of these things. And I remember there was a head teacher we had in our first week of secondary, senior one. Our head teacher, every single day of the 5 days of the study week, came to our S1 class and said, bullying and teasing are not acceptable in this school. If anyone bullies you, whether it's a teacher, if you just feel bullied, you feel uncomfortable, whether it's a teacher, an S6, an S5, or even a fellow S1, don't go anywhere else, come straight to me as your head teacher. My office is open. And he did that for 5 days. And I remember walking into that guy's office and I explained my situation, which had nothing to do with school, but I explained my home situation, the way kids reason. And I remember that guy sat me down and talked to me and invited my parents over for VD to make sure they see him and all of that. That day he had that conversation with my parents, when I went back for that holiday, things began to change. Why? He created an environment that was friendly for me to be able to open up to a complete stranger, because he was a stranger in a way. I opened up. He was able to take his responsibility as someone in charge of an institution that is responsible for my learning, a place where my parents had entrusted the leadership to be able to take care of my safety, to be able to take care of my welfare, to be able to take care of my learning as well. And because he gave us an opportunity to be able to speak out, because he gave us an opportunity to be able to approach him, because he gave us a platform to be able to raise whatever made us uncomfortable, I think abuse in our school was at 0%. Nobody ever complained about these things. Even the few incidents that arose, in the hostel, someone has stolen someone something, they were always diffused at that level because they knew someone would walk straight to the head teacher. And once it got there, you were cooked. Why am I saying this today? When we look at the reflections of our child rights space, I want to link our experiences in the domestic domain at home to our experiences in any other space, including the learning space. Our experiences at home have a direct correlation to how we manage things in other spaces, including the learning spaces. Two, I want to also say that in the context of a child, children analyze situations, Children are able to formulate their own ways of coping with situations. Children are able to analyze from all the people around them who it is that is most likely to have their back if they ever raised that issue. To come back to my situation, I saw that daddy most likely had my back. I saw that my head teacher definitely had my back. And no matter what it is that was going on around me, at least I was assured of two advocates. And so even in the case of the results that Doctor has shared, you see that children have been able to analyze, have been able to identify people that they find approachable. You see that there are people that children have been able to identify as possible advocates that could have their issues presented or preside over the situations of violence that they have to deal with. Broadly speaking, in the child rights sector, I think that on the line of legislations and ratifications and domestications of so many documents that we have signed up to as a country, we get 1,000%. On the lines of enforcement of those legislations, as we all know, we are not at 90%, but neither are we at 0%. I think we would give it a 50–60%. Regardless of what it is, of course, there are many contributing factors, the structures that are weak. We have attitudes, beliefs, and values of the duty bearers, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't change the end result that we are still performing quite poorly. And yet, when we look at situations like Doctor has presented, children have found their own alternatives. Children have been keen enough to identify strategies that work for them. Children have been keen enough to find ways to address their challenges. So while we are here pushing and scoring 50%, someone is finding a solution, the victim is finding a solution, and the fact that they're finding solutions and they work for them, we on the other hand have to be to create an environment that is reaching out to them some more. We need to reach out to them some more. In fact, a lot more, because the half-ticks we have at enforcement, the half-ticks we have with the attitudes of the duty bearers, the half-ticks we have at not yet recognizing children as agents of change, create a vacuum for other things to thrive. We should be closing those vacuums by extending a hand and creating a platform that allows us to meet them halfway or go over the whole way, to be able to pick on those strategies that they're using, identify the positives, build on those positives, sharpen them, and then be able to build something that is a lasting solution to the forms of violence that they experience. I want to wrap my issue up this way. One is that recognizing our realities, and I say we as children, I'm speaking for and on behalf of children, recognizing the realities of children and recognizing the fact that they have potential, they have demonstrated potential to be resilient, to create alternatives to their situations, recognizing that the kids are not just victims, but they're active participants in solving the problems that they face. Our job is to create environments that enable these things to be able to grow. We need to be able to create environments that allow them to approach us even the more without any fear or favor. If my head teacher had not assured us from week 1 of our first week of the first term in senior 1, maybe our stories would have turned out differently. Recently, you heard of a situation where a Ugandan boy, I think in the US, stabbed a girl to death, a girl who was trying to sort of protect her friend that this boy was making a pass at. And in an attempt to protect her friend, she was stabbed to death. So just reflecting on these situations, you see that this child was already playing a sort of guard for their friend. You see that this child was, if it was speaking, I'm sure she said a few things to this boy. You know, she already played the role of another person. Unfortunately, in her case, it cost her her life. What am I trying to say? Children can do so much more, so much more. I run a children's community library, and I have learned that looking at children as just victims, but not innovators, not active participants in the issues that affect them, we lose out. We actually make the children lose out. So we need to be aware of those things, but also finally is that if safety for children is not assured, especially starting from the household, everything else becomes a luxury, including education. However good and friendly an environment of learning might be, as long as the home is not friendly, the teacher is losing out, the child is losing out. Yet if both are friendly, it's a win-win for everybody. I see Professor is back. I think he's alerting me to finish up. I think I'll end there by saying that the family, when we're talking about dealing with violence against children, even in the learning space, this is not a conversation we can have in isolation of the family environment, because it either makes it or breaks it. I thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Helen Grace, for that very well delivered reflection on this space. And thank you for spicing it all up with your own life experiences, which has really helped to drive the point home. We are very glad that you have been able to participate and be the discussant for the paper presented by Dr. Modest Adama. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we are running a bit late. We are running behind, but we need to allow a few questions before we close. And we do have some questions in the chat room that we shall take a look at. But before that, I'm going to request those of you who have questions or comments to put up your hand. Clinton, is it possible for them to put up their hand? I see that there are no mics against their names. If not, we'll just go straight.
All participants, in case you'd like to speak, kindly raise your hand. We'll be able to allow you to speak.
Okay, so while we are waiting, I'm trying to see which comments to take. One is great presentation, UMU team. What do you see as practical ways of integrating child violence against children prevention strategies to child protection programming? That is one question. If you can hold on to that question, and then we'll take Ms. Fatima Abdul Wahab. Please go ahead, unmute, and ask your question.
Hi, firstly, I want to say thank you so much for hosting this webinar and for both presentations that were very informative. Excuse me. My question was around primary age children or ECD. I'm wondering what strategies either one of the presenters have to, I guess, teach about this at a younger age in a local way, in a way that's child-friendly. I'm wondering what strategies or suggestions you have to open the conversation at a younger age. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Please, both presenter and discussant, note that question. Strategies for ECD at the ECD level. We'll give you an opportunity to answer. Fatima, can you please lower your hand, and then we'll see if there's another hand. If not, let's take, we will start with Fatima's question. Let's take a reaction from Modest and also Helen Grace about ECD strategies.
Thank you so much, moderator, Professor Fred. I think I'll respond to the ECD one briefly in the sense that, sorry. Hello, are you able to pick me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. The ECD strategy could be quite a challenge because of the age levels of these children. However, there is something which is going on in most ECD places. Children are involved in singing, drawing, and they enjoy some of these things. I think that would be a strategy we would easily use for ECD, because there's also some violence happening among these little toddlers in their school settings, sometimes in their homes. So we need to utilize some of these approaches, like drawings of what they go through every day. I think that will be one strategy. I'll leave further a discussion related to this to my colleague, the discussant, if she has any to add to that, please.
Please, thank you very much, Modest. Helen Grace, please go ahead.
Prof, I lost you for a little second. I don't know what I heard about ECD, but then lost out on the rest of the question. Could you recap for me?
Yes. One of the participants asked that if you have experience about strategies which younger age children use, especially at the ECD level.
Okay. So my experience is that when you do work with, first of all, the parents of those children and the educators of those children, I think they're especially trained in a way, or they have a God-given ability to come up with ways that me, a social worker, might not be very able to come up with. I have worked with some in the emergency context, and we have come up with some ways. I'm happy to share if anyone is willing to, would be interested in learning some more.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Helen Grace, for that response. I see a hand from Judy Kamani. Can you please go ahead, unmute, and pose your question?
Mine is back to the research that Dr. Odama presented. Can you clarify the role of teachers in the children's choices of selecting or choosing strategies to resolve violence? I know I was on and off. Let me hope I did not miss that, because what I was mainly hearing is what the children were doing on their own accord. But then what came to my mind was then what was the role of teachers, you know, in informing the children's choices, in selecting the strategies to resolve violence, child-to-child violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. You can please lower your hand and mute. Next, we have a question or a hand up from Kasahun Tilahun. Please unmute and make your submission.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. This is Kasan from Ethiopia. Can you hear me? Please let me know.
We can hear.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but your connection
can you hear
is
me,
not very
Professor?
good.
Thank
not
you.
very well. Not very well.
Thank you. Yeah. Raining here in Ethiopia. It's raining, and maybe the connection could be interrupted. Sorry for that. But my question
Kasahun, can you please type your question in the chat room? Your connection is not very good. Please type the question in the chat room. And let's go back to Judy's question. Dr. Dama, Modest, can you please respond to the role of teachers in your study?
Very good. Thank you so much. It should have been the other way around, the role of the children, because that was our focus. But along the way, we also found the role of the teachers coming very strong. The teachers are informed by the children about the violence taking place. And the children individually or as a team would use that strategy to inform the teachers. So as soon as the teachers are informed, the children got help from the teachers. For example, some of the teachers would inform the parents of the children who were fighting and maybe pinching one another and so forth. So the parents got involved later because the teachers took that responsibility to act, but acting with the consultation with the parents as well. And then the other thing is the teachers directly intervene by guiding these children in how to behave in a proper way in their schools, non-violence approach to life, and so forth. And some of the teachers would go as far as informing the pastors or the chaplains in the schools that manage the children spiritually. And I think those were big roles the teachers play in this case. Professor Fred, there was another question that I wanted to respond to. I don't know whether you can give me a minute to it about integration of the strategies.
Half a minute.
Okay, sorry. Let me try. The three strategies we used could be integrated. And how do you integrate this? One way we saw, which was very useful, is to be friendly. The parents should be exemplary so that the children can approach them. The teachers should be exemplary, non-violence kind of behavior, so that the children can relate and watch what they do so that they emulate. That's also different ways to integrate some of this. I would go into details, but since you have given me half a minute, let me stop.
Okay. Okay, then. So we have a very short time. We need to wind this up. John Palonak, you had your hand up. Is it still up or it is down? We can give you an opportunity, and then we shall allow Chaze Sanyo Edward an opportunity of half a minute. And then we also have a chat in the chat room, a question. How do you protect children from wrongful peer influence? Let's hear from John, then Edward, and then we come to Monica's question in the chat. John, please go ahead, unmute.
Yes, good evening, Professor. Good evening, colleagues. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Odama, for that presentation. My question relates to when you did mention about the strategy of how children tend to group themselves based on the location where they come from to address their issues at some points. My question then comes like this. What motivation did you find that make the children to use that kind of strategy to address their problems? Is it based on the distance? Is it based on language? What is it exactly like? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Modest, you want to respond to that immediately?
Yes, please. John, thank you for that question. I think that the quick response I have is that children are motivated by who they know, who they can relate with, and who they can live with very fast in that sense. So the village gives them that opportunity to know one another and to interact with one another. They can go to fetch water together, so they learn a lot of things, even do their homework together in the village where they come from. So that is the opportunity they have, and they use it very effectively to address the violence based on their village associations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Helen Grace, do you have something to add to that?
Prof, I think Doctor has represented me well. That's what I would have said.
Okay, thank you. Finally, we get to Edward. Edward, a quick question, half a minute.
Thank you, Prof. and the team. Mine is just something. One was to say that there are some questions that we had posted in the chat, but maybe, Prof, you didn't pick them. But mine was focusing on asking whether in the study there were some children with disability either reached on, and were there, like the deaf, the blind, are there coping mechanisms? Are they also the same like those children without any disability? That was my concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward, and apologies, I didn't get to. I'm actually still going down that chart, but I haven't gotten, I think, to all the questions. So let's hear from the presenter and discussant what comment you have on Edward's question. Children with disability.
Thank you so much, Edward Chaze, my colleague. Children with disabilities are everywhere. In our study, we found quite a number of them, but the disabilities didn't include those who are blind and with challenges of sight. So they were able to hear us, though sometimes they had the mental challenges of being too slow in the drawing. So we had to give them enough time to do that. So we didn't hurry them in that way. So that was one, but there were disabilities everywhere. As the saying goes, nearly everybody has a disability in some way, a special need somewhere. So the children had some of those challenges.
Okay, thank you. The final question from the chat goes to Helen Grace. How do you protect children from wrongful peer influence? Helen Grace, are you still there?
Yes, I am here. Prof, how do we protect children from wrongful peer influence?
Yes.
For me,
yes.
My argument is that everything starts and ends with what happens at home. Because before children get to school, they have spent 3 years at home. And for the longest time, the people that they look to as their models, role models, whether the parents are aware of it or not, are the people that have a duty over them, and that's mostly the parents. So the issue of preventing children from peer influence, it's a thing that we have to do every day, so that by the time that peer influence stage comes in, the child has had this voice over and over and over again. So talk from when they are 1 year, because you know, at 13, those kinds of challenges will be setting in, and hence they'll have had it many times to be able to make a certain judgment.
Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to bring this webinar to a close. And I want to do that by first and foremost thanking AfriChild for bringing us all together and giving us a good opportunity to dialogue on child-to-child violence. Secondly, I want to thank the presenter, Dr. Modest Odama, with his team from Uganda Matters University, for such a wonderful study that has generated a lot of discussion. Then I want to thank Ms. Helen Grace Namulwana, the discussant, for using your life experience to really spice up the child rights space in Uganda. And finally, I want to thank you, the audience, for being such a nice audience and asking those insightful questions. I would have wanted to give you more time, but unfortunately, the time was not infinite, and I am already way, way beyond time. I'm just lucky that AfriChild has not brought me to book. So with that, I want to end this part of the webinar and invite AfriChild to finally close and tell us when the next webinar will be held and where do we find the link. Over to you, AfriChild.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. We will be communicating the next webinar date with you in the coming weeks. So thank you very much for your time. And yeah, we look forward to having you and engaging you as we go forward. Thank you and have a good evening.